It looks like being black in black spaces because black folks don't wanna talk about queer stuff. It looks like showing up as queer in other spaces, but then not talking about my blackness because they wanna talk about LGBTQ issues over here, and that's not
Mm.
important. Showing up in women's spaces, but being a masculine at a center person. And so, I'm not a feminine centered person. And so showing up in women's spaces and trying to figure out, is this a still a okay, safe, brave space for me to be in?
Hello, my name is Kay Anderson, and you are listening to Lost Spaces, the podcast that mourns the death of queer nightlife. Every episode, I talk to a different person about a venue from their past, the memories that they created there, and the people that they used to know. Okay, I'm going to ask a bit of an annoying question to start off this week's episode, and that is, how much of yourself do you bring to the spaces that you spend time in? And I know that's a bit of a vague, ooh, how big is the universe type question, so I'm going to break it down a bit more. What I'm trying to ask is, how much of the different sides of yourself do you allow to peek through when you're at work or out to dinner with friends or having Sunday lunch with your family or even when you're leaning against the bar in your local club? Are you one of those people that dials back their queerness and pushes down some of their beliefs and censors some of the things that they are thinking but that they don't want to say for fear of upsetting people or antagonizing them? Or are you one of those people who is just 100% themselves, no matter where they go, no matter who is present and who happens to hear them? Don't get me wrong, although I do really admire the people who are always 100% themselves, I think there are probably merits to both approaches, so I'm not necessarily advocating one over the other. But I find it fascinating. I mean, if you've listened to this show before, you know that I find it fascinating to think about human behavior and why we make the decisions that we make and why we are the people that we are. Anyway, all of that is to say that this week's conversation triggered all of these thoughts in me when I got to sit down with the host of the queer news podcast, Anna DeShawn. Now, as you would have heard in that intro that's just played, Anna is a black, masc-of-centre lesbian. And when she was younger, she felt that she had to dial up or dial down different parts of her identity depending on where she was and who she was with, crucially, but not, as it so happens, at her lost space, the lesbian bar Stargaze, which was in Chicago, Illinois. So, without further ado, why don't we find out more about Anna and find out more about what made Stargaze such a magical place? Let's get into it.
I always knew I was a little different. I was a tomboy. That was the language I would have used growing up. I mean, I was a tomboy. I was a gym rat. I was an athlete. I never dated guys, and I never really thought about it in I must like girls type of way. I just never liked them in that type of way that my friends growing up did. And so it really wasn't until undergrad that I felt comfortable enough and really started to examine, like, maybe I am someone who loves the ladies.
So was that because you were questioning why you weren't attracted to men, or was it because you were like, oh, I quite fancy this particular woman?
It's because I fancied a particular woman.
Oh, okay. Okay. And do you care to share any details about this woman?
Oh, she's great. I actually see her quite often here in Chicago from time to time. And we were together all through undergrad. And We were close friends. It was a lovely first real queer relationship.
But okay, hang on a sec. Let's make sure I've got this right. You weren't really thinking about your sexuality. You weren't really thinking about being attracted to someone. Suddenly you were attracted to someone. You were like, okay, maybe I'm queer. And then bam, you were in a relationship for a few years.
Yeah, chill out. This is how the lesbians do it, okay? It's called
Okay,
a
well, I'm
U-Haul
glad
for
you
a
said
reason.
that because I was thinking it, but I didn't want to say it.
Yeah, it's a U-Haul for a reason, okay? We take nothing lightly. Let's go, okay?
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so you had someone to help you build that confidence and push through.
And it wasn't just her. I had a collection of friends doing undergrad who were incredibly accepting and affirming. And they all helped me really to become more comfortable in my own skin.
One of the things, so sorry, we're already going off topic. One of the things that I find really fascinating about when someone comes out and then goes straight into a relationship and then is in that relationship for years is I always look at it through my lens, obviously, and I'm thinking like, oh, but you're missing out on all those adventures. You're missing out on like, the rejection and the pushing yourself and like thinking about the kind of person you want because you've just got that built in. What was it like coming out the other end of that relationship and being like, oh, now I'm going to go and figure out how to flirt and date and to figure out what my sexuality is on my own?
I was in Des Moines, Iowa. There wasn't that much to be missing out on, okay? It wasn't like I was in some big city with a whole bunch of people. I don't think I was missing out on much.
But what you were missing out on were those nights at home feeling sorry for yourself, wondering whether you were ever going to meet someone that you would connect with, which, just underlines the queer experience to me. Like, oh, no one's ever going to understand me.
Yeah, I don't think I ever had that type of a moment.
Wow.
Maybe. I mean, that's just not who I am. That's just not my makeup. If anything, my experience being Black at a predominantly white institution was felt more than my queerness during that particular time. People didn't understand me because of who I was as a Black woman outside of being queer. So queerness was just an additional piece to this puzzle that I was figuring out during that particular time. And my community of friends affirmed me in such a way that I didn't feel like I was missing out on anything, but definitely felt supported.
Okay.
Yeah.
But, okay, so I know nothing about Des Moines, and there's probably a reason why I know nothing about Des Moines. So is that just a predominantly white everything kind of place?
Yes, it is a predominantly white everything,
okay.
cornfields. Many people who attended Drake University, I won't say many, a few people that I encountered had never met a Black person in real life. That's the type of place Iowa is.
Okay. And so going from Chicago to there was a bit of a...
That's the culture shock.
Strange step backwards.
I felt like I was moving forward in life, but from a cultural perspective, yeah, I mean, it was tough.
Okay. How fascinating. And so did you just feel then like you couldn't get on the same page as anyone? Is that what you're saying?
I don't know about being on the same page. We just have different experiences. And when you are the only one, literally, in a classroom, and you are looked at as the person who is supposed to speak to everyone in your entire culture's experience, Chile, that's exhausting. That was exhausting about that experience. Not necessarily my queerness wrapped into that, because I was still trying to figure that all out myself.
And so, and we've gone off from that question that I asked. So coming out of the end of that relationship, what was it like to have been queer for a number of years and then suddenly be like, oh, there's all these things I need to discover about myself?
What do you mean?
Just, when, and this is slightly disparaging of being in a relationship, do you know how... sometimes if you're in a relationship that you don't grow in. You don't get to have a whole lot of experiences outside of that relationship. And then suddenly when that breaks up, you're like, oh, there are all these things I need to work out that I've not given time to or really thought about because I haven't had to.
I don't remember ever feeling like I was missing out on anything. I don't remember ever feeling like I needed to go re-engineer something about my life. I was focused. We ended up breaking up when I went off to get my master's, and we were together for a little bit, but it was long distance. We were young. I wasn't a great communicator, like Chile. It was a lot. We just ended up breaking up. But I'd never felt like I missed something. I felt like I had experienced something.
Yeah, and I think maybe I'm not communicating this in the best way. I'm
Okay.
not trying to say like, oh, a relationship's gross, but I might be saying that a little. But I'm trying to say that you don't always get the opportunity to explore and to try things in relation to your sexuality when you're in a relationship because you're in a relationship.
Yeah, that could be true. I didn't feel that.
Okay. So when you ended up breaking up, it wasn't like, oh, there are all these playful things to go and play with.
Nah, no. I didn't necessarily feel like, oh, I'm free. Let me go play. Nah. This is not my jam.
And it didn't make you like then go, oh, what do I want in a partner? Like, what are the things I'm looking for? What am I interested in? Who do I want to be purposely spending time with?
Not at that point. Not that point in my life. No. That came later. I mean, I was in another relationship, another long-term relationship, and it was after that relationship ended that I began to reflect on, all right, what do I really want? How can I show up better in the world? I ended up going to therapy. That saved my life. And it wasn't until after that relationship that that type of reflection began to happen.
Yeah, because you don't really think about that when you're a kid, do you? You're just like, do you love me? Like, okay.
It's very simple, okay? Now, we want to try to make it felt like a lot at the time, and it was based upon where I was and how old I was and emotionally immature I was. But at that time, no, I wasn't doing that type of introspection.
So it was just me sitting in my room thinking that no one would ever like me.
I don't know if you were alone in that. I don't know if you're alone in that. I was just definitely being fed in multiple ways. And my focus on my end goal, I'm just such a Virgo that
Oh, what does that mean?
it means that
Tell me what that means.
I'm
Sorry,
a perfectionist.
being such a bitch.
Oh, you're fine. I'm a perfectionist. I'm focused. I'm not a great small talk type of person. I've got goals I'm looking to accomplish, and not much is going to get in the way of that. So relationships, I can compartmentalize things very well. And so that's what I mean by that. I don't think you were alone in that. I think there are times
Okay.
when we feel lonely or alone, you know. I think that's a very natural emotion, 100%. And I can also compartmentalize feelings, and I know how to move past a moment when it's time for me to move past a moment.
Which is a blessing and a curse.
It can be. It can be. So that's why I really am really grateful for therapy to help me to understand how I am who I am and how I show up in the world and how people see me, and then also how I want to be seen.
Okay, why don't we go back to Chicago? So you've been in Des Moines, you've come out. Am I saying Des Moines right, by the way?
You are. Yeah, that's
Okay,
it.
good. You've been in Des Moines, you've left university and you've come back to Chicago, you've come back home. And this time, obviously you would have gone back for holidays and stuff, so just suspend your disbelief while I say this. This time you've come back as an out queer person and you're like,
Yes.
yes, gonna get my queer on.
Get my queer on, yeah. Get my queer on for sure. But definitely in an organizational perspective. I spent my time volunteering at an organization called Affinity Community Services, which
Mm-hmm.
serves Black, lesbians, and queer folks on the south side of Chicago. And that's really where I spent a lot of my energy. It's where I realized that there were people like me who looked like me, who were not just surviving, but they had beautiful relationships. They had children. They had successful careers. They were leaders in their community. They were funny. They had a good time. I saw reflections of myself that I did not have an opportunity of seeing during that time in which I was initially coming out in these predominantly white spaces. And so when I came home, I actually was in a relationship and definitely had a good time on the scene, but also was really about building community and finding my
Mm-hmm.
people.
Why is it important to see yourself represented? Oh, that's such a badly worded question.
Would you like to reword it?
I don't know. Maybe I'll leave it as that, as this open question.
It's about the possibility of the thing. For me, I needed to see masculine of center Black lesbians. I needed to see that it was a possibility for me.
Mm-hmm.
I needed to see a reflection of myself. And that was not something I had seen on a large scale at all up until that point. And so finding this space, this community organization, nonprofit in Chicago, was a life-saving moment for me. And it is where I really grew as a human being and not having to compartmentalize or just show up as pieces of myself, but that it was okay for me to show up as my whole self. And so that organization existing showed me that it was possible to not just be living, but to really have a full life and be able to create what type of life I wanted to have.
You've said that up until then you were showing up as pieces of yourself. What does that look like?
It looks like being Black in Black spaces because Black folks don't want to talk about queer stuff. It looks like showing up as queer in other spaces, but then not talking about my Blackness because they want to talk about LGBTQ issues over here, and that's not important. Showing up in women's spaces, but being a masculine of center person. And so, I'm not a feminine centered person. And so showing up in women's spaces and trying to figure out, is this still a okay, safe, brave space for me to be in? When you're trying to figure yourself out and you hold so many identities at intersections that are all underrepresented, it takes some time to be on the journey of finding out who you are in the world. That's what I mean by that.
And so for you showing up in those spaces, is there like a trepidation under confidence?
What do you mean by that?
Well, like just taking the example that you've given about showing up in women-only spaces and being masked, like what does that look like? Does that look like you being apologetic there or being underconfident there? Or
It looks like me being quiet.
okay.
It looks like me showing up and taking it in and figuring out what that means. What are the community agreements in this space? And is this space making room for someone who shows up like me?
Am I welcome? Yeah. And that's a really tough one. I think for me, when I don't know those details, those things, that culture, the unwritten rules, I will just opt out and just not go. And I think I've missed out on a lot because of that.
Yeah, but I mean, experiences cause us to do that.
Oh, yeah. Like it's not without
Yeah.
reason, but
Yeah.
maybe I could be doing more to push and to take up space. I probably display similar behaviors to you in that I go quiet, I withdraw, I just shrink into the background. And maybe I should be saying, nah, fuck you all. I deserve as much space as anyone else here. Let's go. But I don't.
Absolutely. And it takes time to get there. And I am now in that space where I refuse to show up anywhere without all of me and could care less what anybody in any of those spaces have to say about it. And for many years, I have stayed away from historically Black spaces when I was not clear that they were an open and welcoming space for my queerness. Today, I don't care. Today, I will show up anyway. And I am consciously making that decision today in certain spaces. So for me, it's taken time to get to a place where I'm okay with challenging what may not be there for me in hopes that maybe I can make room for somebody else later.
I'm always really like in admiration of those people that are just always 100% themselves and don't even seem to like pick up on all of those little winces and rolled eyes and things that are happening around them. And I don't know whether or not that's just that they aren't picking up on it or they're just so bulletproof that they can keep going through that. But I just find those kind of people fascinating and wonderful.
Yeah, I think they're cool too. I think at some point you may notice, but it's not about you. So for me, I recognize when something is me and when it's somebody else. I'm going to be me. I think growing up, it's easy to question yourself, but once you know yourself and you're comfortable in who you are, you can recognize when it's them and when it's you. And when it's somebody else, I don't have to own that. And I could see it and not have to acknowledge it and not have to internalize it because that's not my stuff to hold. I got my own stuff to hold.
Is it time to maybe talk about stargaze? And this isn't usually how I would start this line of questioning, but it is just building on what we've already discussed. Let me center this in a time frame. In the first time you went, or the second time, or the third time, but within that kind of first period of time when you were going to stargaze, how would you show up?
I was showing up as a Black queer masc woman in this lesbian centered space. And it was a bar, it was a club, they had pool tables. And in Chicago and like many other major cities, there aren't a lot of lesbian bars. The Stargaze was a place where you could go and you knew there were going to be women who love women there and that it was going to be okay for you to be exactly who you were in that space. And I remember that very vividly.
Ah, okay. So you were talking before about showing up in Black spaces and maybe hiding your queerness and showing up in queer spaces and maybe hiding your Blackness. So Stargaze didn't impose that on you?
No, because that queer space was a place for everybody to come. It was clear that they wanted everybody to be there. I didn't walk in there feeling like I had to be one way or another way. I felt like I was walking in there to be exactly who I was.
Ah, brilliant. Okay, so I'm going to ask you to cast your mind back. Do you remember the very first time you ever went?
No.
Do you remember the second time you ever went? I can keep going. Do you remember the third time you ever went?
Please. We could do a dance. It might turn into a song. I don't remember the first through 10 times I went, but I remember the feeling that I had. I remember the layout of the place. I remember partying and I remember...
Okay, so let's focus on the feeling. What's that feeling of walking through the door of Stargaze?
I felt, when I walked through there, I felt like, oh, this is a place that I can be myself. I mean, I was a shy kid. I'm not the one in the club turning up. I'm not the one in the club turning up. I'm not the one partying. I'm not the one dancing like her. Like, that is not my jam. You ain't gonna find me out there like that. But I get joy seeing other people do that and being free in that way, in the ways in which they feel free on the dance floor and all of that.
So if we were at a club and I was like, come dance with me, you'd be like, no, I'm just going to stand here.
If you ask me to come dance with you, I'm going to go dance. But if I'm always just as fine sitting, watching everybody else have a good time.
What if your favorite song comes on?
Then okay. And then when it's off, I'm okay to go back to doing and hanging out and chilling.
Interesting.
I've never been one that needed to experience something in order to get the message or to get the feeling. I never needed to make the mistake in order to not make the mistake again. I can see somebody else make a mistake and understand that that's something I never need to do or experience.
Are you talking about my dancing as though it's a mistake?
I've never seen you do it, Kay. I don't know. You tell me. But in that same vein, if other people are having a good time, I see it. I'm like, all right, that's good. That makes me feel good that they're having a good time. And in turn, I'm having a good time because they're having a good time. So that's what it felt like in there. And it was a refuge. It was absolutely a refuge. And when it closed, it was heartbreaking because it was a place that everybody went and had a really great time together.
So we might be getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. I do want to find out about when it closed and how that felt. But before that, I want to focus our conversation on going there. So you were like, I'm cool. I'm going to stand on the side. I'm not going to break a sweat. I'm not going to throw my drink in the air when my favorite song comes on. Were there any moments of flirtation or exciting times?
I was in a relationship at the time. So, I mean, we were flirting with each other. I wasn't flirting with nobody else because I wanted to go home, okay?
Okay, let's pick up this. So what was going on in your life at this time, like when you started going to Stargaze? Did you start going there when you just returned from grad school?
Yeah, when I got back home from grad school, I was in a relationship and we were living together. And
you met like the month before?
When did we meet? I don't know. I think maybe we known each other 8 months or so.
Sorry,
I really don't know the time.
I'm making a terrible joke about U-Haul lesbians. Sorry, that's...
Oh, U-Haul and child. We might as well have U-Hauled, okay? We might as well had... Yeah, so we were in a relationship. We were living together, and we would go out to the club, and we would go out to Stargaze.
And what was going on for you elsewhere in your life?
I had a job. I was working in streaming media before anybody knew what that was, and figuring out what adulthood really was all about, truly.
And have you figured that out? Can you share?
Yeah, I figured it out, and I don't like it. Adulthood is overrated.
What are the key things I need to know in order to be an adult?
Have a savings account, because there's always something. Yeah.
And so took me through then a typical night at Stargaze.
Typical night at Stargaze. You walk in, they had pool tables. So some folks would be playing pool and just chilling, having a good time, drinking. And then on the other side, you'd walk through and the dance floor would be packed. The music would be bumping. We would hang out with each other and with our friends, laugh, joke, chill, dance. And you just felt like everybody was in there. It felt like everybody was there.
Well, is that a good thing or is that a bad thing?
It's a thing. The queer community is about that big. So,
well, yeah. But on top of that, like we're talking about the lesbian scene as part of the queer scene. What is it like in Chicago? Does everyone know everyone's business?
That ain't my jam, Kay. I don't want to know that much about everybody anyway. But yeah, if you wanted to know, it probably wouldn't be too hard to find out.
Not even a little? Like, are you not interested in just like the tidbits of the most juiciest gossip?
I really am not. But this goes back to what I was saying before about this goes back to what I was saying before about me not necessarily being great at small talk. Yeah, I'm not a big gossiper.
It's good to be in the know, right?
Some things I want to know, some things I don't, child. Ignorance can sometimes be bliss, okay?
Well, that's a good point. But so if you were at Stargaze, would you expect to know most of the people there?
I would expect to recognize most of the people there.
That's kind of like both wonderful and horrible, right?
No. Not for me, it wasn't. Why horrible?
There's just something about not feeling anonymous. I mean, I live in a big city, so this is like probably more about my personality than anything else. But there's something about not being anonymous in the crowd and feeling like everyone who kind of knows you can see what you're doing, even though I'm not going to be doing anything like particularly scandalous while I'm there. But what if I wanted to?
It's funny. When I was first at home and I was afraid of going out, one of the first things I said was, what if somebody sees me that knows me? And they were like, they're going to see you there, right? So that means that they're there too. So does it mean both of y'all are there? So clearly that's going to be okay, right? And I was like, that makes a lot of sense. So, I mean, and that way I can definitely relate.
And so did that put you off going out? Or was it just more of a fleeting kind of slight concern?
When that person reflected that back on me, and I can't remember who even said it to me at this point in time, I was like, oh, well, that's a good point. And I never felt that angst again around going outside at home.
But there still is something, like, even if you're taking away that queer element, which is what I think you're saying, that you were like worried that someone would see you and be like, oh, she's queer. Just seeing someone who you know, and then you being a hot, sweaty mess and trying to like just be silly and have fun. There's something off-putting about that person being there, even if they don't care.
I never had that. I never felt off-put by seeing somebody else in the club.
What if it was your cousin?
I have seen my cousin.
Oh, and that hasn't put you off?
Nah. I was like, oh, okay, I see you. We should talk about this sometime. Yeah, no, not really. Mm-mm.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so that's a me thing.
And that's okay too.
But that's interesting. So when you had moved back, you had come out, but you hadn't like come out. Is that what you're saying?
I had come out, and I had come out to my parents, like, and my family. And yet and still, it was like, what if somebody really sees me? What if somebody really recognizes me? That definitely gave me angst. But when that person reflected back onto me, well, if you see them, they're going to see you, right? And like, both y'all going to see each other. And that just made so much sense to me that the shame, because essentially I believe that that's at the heart of what I was probably feeling on top of anxiety, is a little bit of shame in that. It sort of released itself from me in that moment. And I just let all that go. So no, I never felt that.
If you'd come out to people, who was going to see you that was going to invoke that shame?
Oh, goodness. I mean, my family is everywhere. Growing up in the church.
Oh, I see. Okay.
I know a lot of people in the city. I mean, just anything could have been a thing in my mind at that point.
Mm-hmm. What was coming out to your parents like? My
mom, when I came out to my mom, she said, I always knew. I just never thought you were going to say anything.
Oh,
yeah.
Is that a nice thing to say or a mean thing to say?
It was a mom thing to say. It was a Gemini thing to say. And we cried, and she affirmed me, and it was wonderful. My dad said I just hadn't met the right guy yet. And yeah.
He doesn't still think that, does he?
No.
Okay.
He's over it now. And I probably came out to him probably a couple more times. But he's very religious. And my mom was too. But my mom had different experiences than my dad.
But so your mum saying, oh, I just thought you wouldn't tell us. Is that just because you're like a secretive person, or?
I don't know if I was a secretive person, but I definitely compartmentalized things. And
yeah, okay.
I was definitely very focused. And she probably was just like, she's just going to live her life. Probably. That's just always who I've been, I think. So I think that's probably what she meant by that.
Oh, how fascinating.
Because I'd been a town boy all my life. So it wasn't that my attire was, that was probably a clue to a lot of people, but it wasn't a clue to me. That was just who I was. It didn't signify that I was queer at all. Not to me, it didn't.
So did other people lay down like hints and be like, hey, if you ever thought you might not be straight? Or would people
no one ever said a word to me. There was only one time in high school that there was a rumor and somebody was saying that I was gay. And I was like, I ain't gay. What are y'all talking about? Because at that point, I didn't identify as anything. I didn't identify as gay or anything else. I was just who I was. And everybody who heard the rumor said, that's just who Anna is. What are you talking about? And so I didn't necessarily internalize that, but I remember that coming up at one point.
It's so funny. And I'm going to generalize wildly here, and I might be totally wrong, and someone's going to get annoyed at me for saying this. But it's funny that, like, boys who are queer get told over and over, like, you're going to grow up to be gay. You're totally a fag. You're gay. And then girls will often be treated like, oh yeah, she's just a tomboy. Oh yeah, she's just one of the lads. And then it just doesn't come up in the same way.
100%. My experience was night and day different than gay boys or gay young men that I knew of. I have a very distinct memory in grammar school. As I played basketball my whole life, I was an athlete my whole life. I was a gym rat. I was played 4 sports in high school. I played softball for a year in college. And
the signs were all there.
Child, okay,
Let me just
they
say.
were all there, okay? All of them, okay? Somebody needed to tell me, but no one said a word to me, okay? But in grammar school, I remember there was somebody else who was a friend, and he was definitely effeminate, and he kept a knife in his shoe to protect himself. I never felt the need to have a knife on me to protect myself from anybody. I never experienced that type of bullying and harassment. And I know that my effeminate brothers absolutely have different experience than masc women. It's just totally different. And I believe it's all wrapped up into misogyny. I think it's all of that. It's wrapped
like
up in there.
misogyny, in that, like, there's no way that she couldn't be heterosexual, because why wouldn't you love penis?
That, and I identify socially more with boys, so they don't have a problem with me.
Yeah.
I'm a good athlete. That's just who Anna is. No one is questioning who I am, because I'm okay with that. But an effeminate young man threatens men or young boys or young men themselves. And I feel like that is all just wrapped up into how we feel about women. And I feel like so often, because of how I present, people don't necessarily see me as, quote unquote, a woman in that way.
And the foregone conclusion is, it makes sense to want to be masculine, because masculine is the top of the food pyramid. I don't know why I said food pyramid, but the women are at the bottom. So why would you even want to be more feminine?
And I don't understand it.
Yeah.
Because, see, he didn't have any problem with the girls, right? He was cool with all of us. It wasn't us, right, that he felt danger from, endangered by.
School is so horrible. Human beings are so horrible.
That part.
Anyway, we should probably talk more about Stargaze. So let's go there. So it closed in like the late noughties, early 10s. Do you remember hearing about it closing?
Oh, yeah. It was big news. Yeah. That place, Stargaze, mattered to a lot of people. So I absolutely remember it happening. I remember it being a big deal. I remember people being very sad about it. And honestly, even today, because of the lack of lesbian bars and spaces, it still comes up today. Dang, I miss Stargaze. Because there still aren't spaces dedicated.
Okay. So let's not speak in oh my God, I can't say the word. Generalities? Let's not speak in generalities. Let's focus on you.
Okay.
How did you feel when you found out?
It was sad. It was sad when Stargaze closed, because it was another space that was no longer going to be available and accessible for us. And the question was, where do we go now? Where do we go now?
And were you still going to Stargaze at the time that it closed?
Yeah. Yeah, it was the place to go. There were only a few places we went, and Stargaze was on the list. So yeah, absolutely, it was a place to go.
So how did you say goodbye?
I think I continue to say goodbye, to be honest, because it's still very much so in my mind that a dedicated lesbian space like stargaze has yet to still exist for me in sort of this club atmosphere type of way. So I think I'm always still thinking about it and sad that it's not here.
So what do you think having access to stargaze taught you about yourself?
That I'm not alone, that there's other people out here that look like me, party like me, love like me, dance like me, dress like me.
Stand in the corner like you.
Mm-hmm. Yes, child. That's me. Find me there, okay? And having a great time. A tequila on the rocks with a lime, okay? Keep it simple.
Do you have any memories of stargaze or maybe clubbing from your own queer scene that you want to share? Well, if you do, you know what I'm going to say, don't you? Why not get in touch? I want to create the biggest online record of people's memories and stories of queer clubbing, but I need your help. I cannot do it alone. Go to lostspacespodcast.com, find the section Share a Lost Space, and then tell me all about what it is you got up to. You could also reach out to me on Facebook or Instagram, where my handle is Lost Spaces Pod. Find out more about Anna by listening to her podcast, which is called Queer News and is all about queer news, wherever you stream podcasts. Or you can also follow her on Instagram at Anna DeShawn, or just visit her website, which is conveniently annadeshawn.com. If you liked this episode, I would really appreciate if you took the time to subscribe, leave a review on your podcast platform of choice, or just tell other people who you think might be interested in giving it a little listen too. My name's Kay Anderson, and you have been listening to Lost Spaces.